A lot of people question what I do during the day. Well, you work with people going through divorce. What in the world makes you choose something like that? But it is a passion of mine that I do.
Yeah. Everybody, to another episode of Recovery TV Live. Today we're going to talk about what do you do when divorce is put on the table, and I have a very special guest with me today to talk with us about that.
And so when a couple is in that situation, when someone is leaning out and has actually said, I'm thinking about divorce, that is where discernment counseling comes in. It's specifically designed for couples right there.
So my guest today is Matt Stevenson. I'm real excited to have him on the show today. He is a licensed marital family therapist. He is also a certified discernment counselor. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means exactly. And he also runs a private practice here in our community where his specific focus is on couples who are on the verge of divorce. It's not the only thing that he does and sees. He is a couples expert too and does a lot of work in that area, but he has made that a specific focus and does a unique type of treatment to help work with those couples. So I'm really honored to have him on the show today, and he's going to come on in just a minute. I just want to remind everybody that to make sure you go to like our Facebook page and follow us on future episodes. And if you're watching this on the YouTube rebroadcast, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we're also trying to have a stronger presence on Instagram too. So there's the link to that. You can check us out or follow us on Instagram. So as I said, very special guest today, Matt Stevenson, is here in the studio to talk to us about what do we do when divorce is on the table. Matt,
Thanks for having me on.
thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here. It's an honor.
Yeah. As we were talking earlier, that working with couples on the verge of divorce, it's a very unique niche.
Yeah.
Probably, and I would imagine very difficult in a lot of ways.
A lot of people question what I do during the day. Well, you work with people going through divorce. What in the world makes you choose something like that? But it is a passion of mine that I do.
Yeah. Couples therapy is difficult in general.
Yeah.
But I imagine, when you're working with couples that are this volatile, that are dealing with this level of stress,
Well, yeah, it is. It's one thing to work with a couple who comes in and they both have some ownership in their contribution of with whatever they may be fighting about or working through. But as soon as the idea of divorce enters into it, it introduces a whole nother dynamic in the relationship. It's a very powerful force, and it kind of changes everything in terms of having couples therapy. So, yeah.
What's happening in relationships that get people to this point?
What gets you to that point? What gets a couple to that point? Well, I think, I've been married 18 years. I know some of those things that can, we fight about stuff. Stuff happens. Conflict happens, It can be about parenting stuff. I mean, if you have kids, it can be about money. A lot of people fight about money. Conflict happens around all sorts of things. Each couple that comes in would have their own unique blend of issues that they're working through. And so trying to work through some of that stuff, well, that's one thing, But what gets people to divorce, I think, is when people fight and have conflict, which I help a lot of people with. That's another kind of specialty I have, is when divorce isn't necessarily on the table, I'll help people just manage that conflict. And when two people, or at least one person in that couple starts to quote unquote harden towards the other person, which what I mean when I say that is they just really start to believe genuinely negative things about the other person. And they get that core belief built up. And
so there's a quote that so many divorces happen because one or both partners have each developed a hardened heart toward each other, seeing each other through very dark glasses.
And that's another little picture that I use, is those dark glasses. That it's built up through experiences, through conflict, and maybe even people bring baggage into the relationship from previous relationships or growing up. But they get this pair of dark glasses, as it were, to where even if their spouse or partner does something even like positive towards them, that person with those glasses on can kind of spin it in their mind to say, well, that was a negative thing that they just did. It's just kind of a human nature. We can do that. We have the ability to kind of spin things that way. We interpret things, I would say, a lot of times wrong.
Oh, sure.
applying the wrong motives to
Yeah.
somebody where, not giving them the benefit of the doubt, you're assuming the worst about
Yeah,
them.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's really easy to let your imagination
Oh, yeah.
go when you're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
Your my colleague Carrie, who's one of our co-hosts, that's not here today. She always says that your brain has one job, and that's to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So when you're hurting, I think it doesn't make sense for the brain to fill in the gaps with a lot of positive, vulnerable
Right.
things. So, well,
Right.
I think he loves me.
Yeah.
Still, it actually makes more sense for the brain when it goes into protection mode
Yeah.
to fill in the blanks with negative information. So if you don't quite understand what your partner's saying and you're in a very volatile situation, and of course the communication isn't the way it should be, so you can have
Yep.
tell me what you mean, help me understand.
Right.
You kind of withdraw, and then you're just left to your imagination.
Right. Which defaults to the negative just about
Right.
every time. And
Yeah.
so that's why when we work on conflict, just with couples counseling when divorce isn't on the table, we try to work through that idea of, disciplining your mind to assume better motives on the other person, because it doesn't naturally do that.
Oh yeah.
I think we all naturally assume the worst that way. So I mean, you've heard it said many times before, having a good relationship takes work, and it takes
Right.
discipline, and I think that's the discipline right there.
Yeah.
And so when that discipline is not done, you haven't learned to do those things, or
Yeah.
you haven't reached out for help when maybe you should have,
Exactly.
you harden naturally
Yeah.
towards someone. And once people get to the point, at least one or sometimes even both partners get to the point where they've hardened sufficiently, then divorce will come out and say, that might be the end of it.
Sure. Yeah.
So-
Because you can only stay in that state of existence
That's
for
right.
so long, and
Mhm.
I think it's important to know, for people watching this that are, so many times in our culture, people, especially in our religious culture, and we're right smack dab in the
we
middle of
are
the Bible
in
Belt.
Oklahoma, yep.
Yeah, and so they're being shamed for wanting to be happy and entertaining the idea that in order to do that, I need to get out of this, or
Right.
likely might have to get out of this relationship.
Mhm.
And for those of you watching, if no one has ever told you that before, it's okay to entertain all possibilities to in order to be happy within
Yeah.
reason, right?
Well,
Obviously,
simply having these
violence
thoughts,
and things
yeah.
like that, we don't want to entertain those thoughts.
Right.
But we're talking about, if I have to get out of this relationship to be happy, then sometimes that's what needs to happen. And I think
Mhm.
when we start denying that reality,
Yeah.
it gets worse.
Right. It actually gets worse. And so if you can accept it and not see it so much as taboo, it can actually
Right.
help. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about discernment counseling. That's a big part of discernment counseling.
I completely agree. We got to change the narrative in our culture on what relationships mean, what marriages mean, what divorce means. We're both marriage and family therapists. We've talked about this before. We are not advocates for divorce. We want to see the relationships work out.
That's why we exist. Yeah.
But we also understand that, where our personal stance is, what we're passionate about, is not reality for a lot of people. And as much as some people try to make it work, the reality is of marriages and relationships is it takes two people
That's right.
to make it work.
Yep.
And you could try as hard as you want to, and the other person not be in it, and that relationship is not going to
Yeah.
work.
Yep. That's the imbalance that
Right.
we run into when one person starts to, through their hardness of heart that I talked
Right.
about, they start to entertain those thoughts of, I
Right.
think I might want out. I feel trapped.
Yeah.
They start having thoughts like this. Maybe this marriage was a mistake. Somehow
Exactly.
we were young. We made a
Right.
mistake. We're not quote unquote compatible.
Exactly.
And maybe we never were. And they just keep those thoughts just keep
Yeah.
spinning around.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I often say is to couples is that, or to an individual in a couple relationship is, let's just say I'm seeing the husband of a heterosexual couple.
Right.
I might say, until you're willing to lose her,
Right.
you're not ready to have her.
That's right. It's the old that if you love someone, you got to be able to
Let them go, right? It's
Yeah.
paradoxical, right?
Right, yeah.
It's that we're attracted to people who aren't that their happiness and their well-being in life isn't dependent on
That's right.
any given relationship.
Mhm.
This doesn't mean like that you're a player.
Right.
You know, I'm a player. You know,
Right.
that's what Josh is saying. I should be. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. You know, what I'm saying is that having the confidence and the emotional intelligence to say that if this doesn't work out, I'll be okay. I'll
Right.
figure it out.
That the core of your being doesn't rest in this relationship.
And
Yeah.
and what's crazy about that is I think that those types of relationships have more longevity, and
Right.
those are the relationships that are going to last 40, 50 years, because your
good
balance and
balance.
well-being
Yeah.
doesn't rest on the well-being of the relationship. So when you're talking about marriages at hills and valleys,
Mhm.
when you hit one of those valleys, and you're someone that knows I'd be okay without this relationship,
Right.
those valleys don't suck so bad.
Right, you can weather it better.
Yeah. You don't freak out as much.
Yeah.
But when you hit one of those valleys and your whole world is that relationship and you're
Right.
dependent on it,
Yeah.
then it becomes imperative.
Well, then panic can set in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's one little issue I kind of work with couples, again, even when we're just doing couples counseling and divorce isn't on the table, in terms of, I think that's kind of a natural thing in most relationships, that there's going to be one partner who's a little bit more independent,
Mhm.
and the other partner who's a little bit more dependent on that relationship for their sense of self.
Right.
And so that can actually, if it gets out of balance, that can be a major source of conflict. You know, very underlying factor in a lot of conflict. So,
Right.
so yeah, that's a very important thing for people to understand, that to a degree that's normal. And that's
Right.
something to try to keep in balance, you know,
Yeah.
to allow each person to be who they are and to meet in the middle.
You're right. In fact, one of the common expressions, right, in the world of discernment counseling is couples on the brink,
On the brink.
right?
Yeah.
Which was coined by, I think, Bill Doherty.
Bill Doherty, in fact,
Right.
that was kind of what the discernment counseling, it grew out of what they called the Couples on the Brink project.
Right.
It was a great thing. So
So since we're talking about that, since we brought that up, let's just go ahead and tell us a little bit. So as I mentioned, everybody, Matt is a certified discernment counselor, and a lot of people haven't heard about that or know what that is.
Right.
But it actually is a really fascinating form of a specialized form of couples therapy that is unique to the
Right.
type of situation that we're talking about in this episode. So Matt, go ahead and tell us a little bit about what discernment counseling
It's
is.
something, it's designed specifically for couples in this situation. Let me describe a little bit more in depth, kind of following with what we talked about in terms of that independent versus the dependent and all that kind of stuff, that when it gets out of balance, and one of those partners, usually, of course, the more independent one a lot of times will start to say, I think I might want out. They take that independence and start leaning out. We call them the leaning out partner. And
Okay.
so it starts this, you can call it a vicious cycle of it's called the leaning in, leaning out cycle. So that, you know, naturally when one partner starts to lean out, and not even saying divorce yet, but really behaving in a way that's very, very distant and very just, you know, that's when affairs can happen and stuff like that. That is a leaning out behavior. And the reaction from the spouse is usually what? To pull them back in, to put all this effort into, I'm going to redouble my efforts to try to get this person back in. I'm going to go find a counselor. We're going to hire a professional to get this person to re-engage, to come back. And unfortunately, what usually happens is then the leaning out person will lean out even more, because now there's two people trying to yank them back into this relationship.
Right.
And it adds that pressure, and it actually makes the problem worse, just like we were talking about before. And so when a couple is in that situation, when someone is leaning out and has actually said, I'm thinking about divorce, that is where discernment counseling comes in. It's specifically designed for couples right there. It actually addresses that leaning out partner and gives them, just like you said, it gives them that respect, saying it's okay to be where you're at right now.
Right.
And it takes the pressure off of that person. And like I said, like you said before, I don't like divorce. We, as couples counselors, as marriage counselors, we try to prevent that. You know, to prevent it, you kind of have to move towards it a little bit. and get close to it, kind of
Yeah.
like a firefighter.
Yeah.
In order to fight fires,
Yeah.
you gotta get right in there. You can't
Yeah.
you can't run away from it. You know.
But in my understanding, like in discernment counseling, you have like 3 options, right?
That's right. It focuses on 3 paths. Yeah.
Tell me those 3 options.
Okay, so the 3 options are basically discernment counseling is it's a decision-making process. That's why it's called discernment counseling. You're discerning between one of these 3 paths. The first one being what we call the status quo. It's like, well, we're just going to kind of bide our time and just keep going the way we're going. There's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of people kind of, you know, they're like, why would we want to do that? But there are very good reasons for it. But that's path 1. Path 2 is basically when one or both partners say, I think I've made my decision, divorce it is. And so we start moving, that's the divorce path right there.
Right.
But then path 3, that's a little bit, it takes a little explanation. Path 3 is basically we take the option of divorce, it's on the table, we take it and we just kind of put it over on this shelf, proverbially speaking. We put it over on the shelf and we just leave it there. It's still there, we don't take it away, but we leave it there for about 6 months. And during that specific amount of time, the couple, the leaning out, the leaning in partner, they both agreed to 6 months of 100% all-out effort in working on fixing those issues in the relationship.
Right.
And discernment counseling helps them explore each one of those options and what it's going to look like, and really get to where each one of those is a viable option.
Right.
You know, for each person. And what that means is for the leaning in person, the very, you know, the desperate one, the panicking one, getting them a little bit more comfortable with path 2.
Right.
To try to take the pressure off that leaning out spouse and to maximize through that the chances of saving that relationship.
Path 2 being the divorce path.
The divorce.
So what I find fascinating about this, because again, if you're watching this, you have heard Matt and I say like how much, you know, as marriage family therapists, we're advocates for the marriage.
Right.
But, you know, if those are the 3 options that you're helping them entertain, you have to be okay with which option they choose, right?
Yep, in a strategic way.
So how tell people that are watching this, how do you do that for yourself to personally to let that be an okay option for you?
That's hard work for me. That really is. That actually touches on a very personal, you know, aspect of why I do this, because I do root for path 3. I want them to choose path 3, you know, but I have to strategically and purposefully suspend that. And to just genuinely within myself and genuinely go with the idea that, you know, that if I can get okay with that, and I can even help that leaning in spouse get okay with that, again, it maximizes the chances that this leaning out spouse will start to warm back up a little bit, you know. It's you know, it just maximizes those chances. Where if we continue, and this is the way I think about it, if we keep the same cycle going, if I just join with that leaning in spouse and go, come on back in, let's work on this, it's not going to work.
Right.
It'll blow up in our faces. So.
Exactly. And so what I think is important for the viewers to understand when you're seeking out a discernment counselor, it's likely that they are rooting for the relationship, right?
Right.
But also remember, at the core of it, at the helm of it, I think all counselors are rooting for your happiness.
Exactly.
And we understand that that therapy isn't about what we want either. And so we do have to be okay with that option that we personally, not professionally, but we personally don't want to see happen. But
that's right. And it's a challenge. It is a challenge.
But like I said, you know, at the helm of it, at the core of it, happiness is what we want to see. So, you know, I want people to figure out how to live a happy life, and if they can figure that out, maybe they can figure out a happy marriage, maybe with the person they're with, or maybe with somebody else. I don't know. But I think you're right. Like you said, I like how you said it, that even the counselor has to get up right to the edge of that to give the relationship the best shot.
Right. I think everybody in this world is on a journey of learning. And that no matter which path they choose, discernment counseling, one of the core goals of discernment counseling isn't necessarily to, you know, save the relationship or anything like that, but really it's to help each person get a deeper understanding of what happened here,
Yeah.
And if you go to path 2, the divorce path, you go on to other relationships, you will have learned something and grown through this,
Right.
you know? And so it helps you in those future relationships. So yeah, ultimately it's to gain a deeper understanding of what happened here, and then again to gain a deeper understanding of those 3 paths,
Right.
and which one to choose. So.
Right. And so, okay, so some of the questions that people might be asking, you know, is when divorce is on the table, to kind of assess, you know, the how volatile is this? I mean, where are we at in terms of like the life of this relationship? Is it hanging on by a thread? Are we on the brink? And one thing you mentioned is this concept of the leaning out spouse, or leaning in, leaning out. And I want to bring up a quote that I actually pulled directly from discernmentcounseling.com, which I'm assuming this is likely quoted by Bill Daugherty, who is kind of the founder of this approach to therapy.
I think so.
And it says the leaning out partner is supported where they are emotionally.
Right.
And the leaning in spouse is equally supported in their own emotional state.
Right.
Discernment counseling avoids starting half-hearted couples therapy with these mixed agenda couples. It accepts ambivalence rather than trying to work around it or overcome it.
Right, and that's summing it up. He's saying even if there's that leaning out spouse, the one that's kind of saying, I think I might want out of this, giving them that respect and saying, you know what, you're there, and there's reasons for that. There's good reasons for it. And so as that person receives that respect from that counselor, that really does help.
Right. For people that are watching this, you know, it's the type of couples Matt's working with a lot is where one person is wanting to save the marriage and the other person is on the fence about it,
Right.
or they're actually leaning toward
over the fence,
right,
sometimes,
leaning toward divorce.
Right.
And if that's your situation, then that's what discernment counseling is looking at, and that's pretty reflective that the marriage is in trouble.
Right. There's some serious problems to deal with there.
The marriage is in trouble at that point. It's beyond poor communication. It's beyond disconnect. I mean, there are definitely those things there, but we're talking about hanging on by a thread, right?
Right.
So that's where discernment counseling comes in. So the concept that was in this quote that's interesting is Bill Daugherty says these mixed agenda couples.
That's what kind of drove his founding of the Couples on the Brink project, which led to discernment counseling, is the idea that in the counseling world there was nothing there to help quote unquote a mixed agenda couple. And that mixed agenda couple is where one is leaning in, one is leaning out, because no matter what dynamics were going on that caused conflict in the relationship prior to somebody starting to lean out, once that leaning in, leaning out dynamic begins, and that they become that mixed agenda couple, it creates its own set of dynamics that has to be addressed.
Yeah. This was just in conversation with you when we were talking about this episode. You, the title of this episode is When Divorce is on the Table, and you said when divorce is on the table, the couple needs to carefully discern what side of the table they are on.
Right.
And I'm assuming that can be a very a scary discussion to have, like kind of facing the reality of that.
Well, it's interesting because sometimes it can be scary to face that, but sometimes when you describe that dynamic to a couple, it gives them a sense of relief, like, oh yeah, I didn't see that going on, but now that you say that, and that can actually sometimes be a source of comfort. But yeah, it can be scary too to see that.
Sure. Imagine just breaking through the denial that this. When the couple, both of them, like, this is where we are.
Kind of admitting this is where we're at.
It's scary, and
then sometimes, let me add this, that, you know, kind of figuring out what side of the table you're on, that kind of a thing.
Right.
Well, there's the leaning outside, there's the leaning outside. You know, it's most of the time, I would say, you know, most of the time, it's fairly clear when somebody's leaning out. It's almost up in your face obvious that this person is leaning out. But sometimes it can flip, and that's kind of where it gets crazy, where you don't know which side of the table you're sitting on, because sometimes that leaning in partner, who's the desperate to save the relationship, they've been working on this person for so long, trying to drag them back in. Maybe they've seen 2 or 3 counselors that have tried to help that way, you know, and they get frustrated, and they finally get to the point where, like, you know what, this person is just almost being abusive. They're being so leaning out that way.
Yeah.
And they get frustrated and say, you know what, maybe now I'm leaning out. maybe I need to get out of this. I deserve better, that kind of a thing.
Right.
And so it can totally flip. In fact, a lot of people come in, they'll describe that leaning in, leaning out, and go back in time a little bit and say, well, actually it's funny because it didn't used to be this way. It used to be kind of the opposite.
And I think in working with couples, I think a lot of times the couple that's leaning in, that's what they're afraid of the most.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to not want this.
Right. What if I start to really get frustrated and start leaning out? Yeah.
And
then we're all in trouble because then nobody's advocating for the relationship.
And it definitely it's a real possibility, right?
Yeah.
So
It does happen.
So describe the process, like if someone came in to see you to work on, hey, we're entertaining the idea of discernment counseling, kind of walk them through the process of what they'd experienced.
Well, one of the first things I do is I offer a free 20-minute phone consultation, just to kind of talk to that person who maybe is initiating things. Excuse me.
I'll edit that out.
Thank you. And so we talk to them, and like I said, it's free of charge, just to kind of see if this is right for you, describing what discernment counseling is and stuff like that. But then one of the harder parts is getting that leaning out spouse to do that too. I'll offer that to them too as a free 20-minute, and just kind of tell them how it's different than couples counseling and how it's not going to be that same old trying to drag you back into the relationship. Anyway, so we start with that, and so let's say they both agree, say, let's do this, let's give it a try, right? So both people come in for the session. They both arrive at our offices for the session, and we meet together for about the first 10 minutes or so. And we just connect and kind of figure out where are you at with the discernment process, do you have any questions, stuff like that. And but then we split it up. So essentially, discernment counseling is one-on-one counseling. Usually what I try to do is I'll take the leaning out spouse first. Because they're the ones with, I guess you could say, the least amount of motivation or patience for this. So let's dig right in and give him or her that respect and that relief of knowing that you're being heard. Anyway, so we do that first for about 40 minutes, which, by the way, a full discernment counseling session is about an hour and a half. And sometimes the very first one can be closer to like 2 hours, but it's all broken up like this, so it's doable. And then, so after that 40 minutes, we switch it up and meet with the other person, and I work with them on their stuff. And then we meet together at the end and check in, and sometimes present to each other what they may have gained from that time, right? And it's not a give and take. It's not, hey, I learned this, what do you think about that? That's for after. You guys do that, after you leave. It's just a presentation. I gained this, okay, I gained this, and then we schedule our next session. And discernment counseling, you don't commit to anything beyond the next session. And that's, again, for the leaning out partner. That gives them a sense of comfort. That this isn't going to be some big open-ended thing that I'm committing to here. And so it's a maximum of 5 sessions. But you only commit to the next session. And so we talk about that. Do you want to come in for another? And yes, sure, we'll come in and we'll talk a little bit more. So rarely do people say, no, that's it, I'm out,
And one thing I just want to be clear to the audience on, like, you hear Matt talking about the leaning in, leaning out, and like not putting too much pressure on the leaning out. And if you're the leaning in partner, you're probably feeling very hurt by what the leaning out partner's doing. And you hear him talking about being concerned about the leaning out partner's feelings, but you have to remember, like, when that person's already already feeling like that's the best option. And so if we don't respect where they are emotionally with it, and we're like, well, we need to reschedule your next appointment today, and you get this on the schedule, or you need to choose option 3, and you need to do this or that, then that's adding more pressure, and you put more pressure on something that's already feeling a lot of pressure, and it's likely going to tip over the edge. So I think this is where, I'm assuming you'd say the same thing, Matt, that where when you go through this process, that you need to trust the process. Matt knows what he's doing with this. And I'm not saying you help everybody. I'm not saying everybody. Not everybody gets, like, the leaning in partner doesn't always get what they want in this situation, but there's special training that went into this, and this is what you do. And I wish there was some sort of a guarantee. I wish there was some sort of a formula we could just apply, it's going to fix everything. And that would certainly make the leaning in partner comfortable. Oh, good, this will work, this will work. But you do have to trust the process, and you do have to. The big work with the leaning in partner is try to help them
in a way, become a little more neutral,
Right.
less desperate, less panicking, more neutral to say, you know what, whatever this person chooses, I'll be okay with, or I'll try to be okay with, you know? And that takes the pressure off the leaning out spouse, and that helps them to soften up, and it gives you more chance that it will work out, and they'll choose that path 3, work on the relationship, and hopefully reconcile.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you
Thank you.
doing this today, sitting with us, talking about a very interesting and very important topic, so we can start helping destroy this taboo and help people get rid of their shame that comes with it, and realize that relationships are hard, marriages are hard, and if we don't face the reality of it, then we actually could perpetuate it and where it gets worse. And so thank you so much for being on Recovery TV Live. But that brings us to, as Carrie would say, Josh's favorite part.
The lightning round.
So we are going to do Fast 5 with Matt Stevenson. So are you ready for Fast 5?
I don't think so, but I'll give it a try.
All right. All right, so when we say fast, it doesn't mean answer fast. It just means this is the last part of the show.
Right.
So we're going to
Stick with
get
it.
through this, right? This is a little fun part to add to it. So let's start with the first question. First question is, name somebody, dead or alive, that you have never met or you've never known, that you would like to have dinner with.
Oh, I thought about that actually. Matthew McConaughey.
Oh,
He is one of the coolest guys.
Yeah.
I mean, I just, you know,
Would you
love to chat.
Right. So I have to ask you, can you do your best Matthew McConaughey impression?
Without unbuttoning my shirt a couple.
Yeah.
No, is it all right?
All right, well, let's do the second question. Second question is, what word is fun for you to say?
Oh gosh, onomatopoeia.
Very good.
I like that word.
Yeah,
Onomatopoeia.
now you have to tell us what it means.
Oh gosh, I think
Valerie, do you know?
see that's where I think it's where a word is what it sounds like.
Oh, like bosom or
Like
flower?
splash,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's what.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
Valerie. I hope I am right.
Yeah.
But I love saying it. I love saying
Yeah.
that word.
All right, question number 3. What is the last show you binge watched?
Binge watched. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
The Good Wife. We got into The Good Wife.
With what's her name?
Juliana Margulies.
Yes, I really like her. Yeah.
Good show.
Yeah.
I like that.
All right, next question is, what song or band are you currently hooked on?
So I'm going to say Shane and Shane. You ever heard of Shane and Shane?
I have not.
Okay, Shane and Shane. They're kind of a Christian group. They're kind of a praise and worship group.
Yeah.
But they are extremely good. Wonderful guitar players, incredible voices. So Shane and Shane. Yeah, they're not related at all. They just happen to be named Shane.
They're both named-
They're
oh,
both
so-
named
okay.
Shane. Yeah.
Gotcha. And the last question is, what's your favorite podcast to listen
Oh
to?
gosh. Ron Burgundy.
I just started that.
I think because I told you about it. I
Did
don't
you?
know. Yeah, we were talking about it before, but I love it. It is hilarious. It's wrong.
I just subscribed to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. You great with Fast 5 round. All right. Thank you all for being here today and supporting us on Recovery TV Live. Travis Ernst will be here. He's also a licensed marriage and family therapist, but he's also a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and works for an organization where they do a lot of work on gambling addiction. And so Travis is going to be here